The code was a living thing under my fingertips. It breathed in discrete, logical gasps, a universe of pure reason expanding with every keystroke. I called it Project Chimera. To the uninitiated, the screen was just an epilepsy of brackets, variables, and commands, a waterfall of arcane symbols in stark white and electric blue against a black background. But to me, it was poetry. It was a cathedral of logic I was building one line at a time, and its stained glass windows were neural networks that dreamed in patterns no human mind could consciously conceive. For 2 years, this had been my world, not the sterile, glass-walled fishbowl of an office at Synapse Dynamics, not the incessant chatter about funding rounds and user acquisition, but this, the silent, perfect hum of creation. Chimera was a generative language model, but that description is criminally inadequate. It was like calling the Mona Lisa a painting of a woman. Chimera didn't just predict the next word in a sentence. It understood intent, nuance, and subtext. It could write a legal brief in the style of Charles Dickens or debug its own source code with a fluency that was almost sentient. It was my magnum opus, my child, and my ticket out of the cubicle farm and into a role where I could finally be recognized for what I could do. The London office was on the 28th floor of a shard-adjacent skyscraper, a palace of glass and steel that was supposed to inspire innovation, but mostly just gave everyone a low-grade anxiety disorder. The pressure was immense. Innovate or die. Ship or sink. Disrupt or be disrupted. The corporate mantras were plastered on the walls in a sans serif font that was probably focus group tested to be both edgy and reassuring. I did my best to ignore it all. I'd come in early, leave late, and spend the hours in between, in a state of deep, uninterrupted flow, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the quiet thrill of solving the unsolvable. Burning the midnight oil again, Elara? The voice shattered my concentration. I flinched, my fingers freezing over the keyboard. I didn't have to look up to know who it was, Julian Thorne. He had a way of moving through the office like a ghost with good cologne you never heard. Him coming, you just suddenly smelt him. I sighed and swiveled in my chair, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Just ironing out a recursive loop, Julian. You know how it is. He leaned against the partition of my cubicle, a perfect picture of effortless corporate grace. His suit was tailored, his hair was immaculate, and his smile was a weapon. He held out a paper cup, brought you a flat white. You look like you need it. Thanks, I mumbled, taking the coffee. This was his routine. The casual check-in, the thoughtful gesture, the carefully calibrated interest. For months, he had been my shadow, my self-appointed cheerleader. So, he began, his eyes flicking to my screen, where lines of Python coiled like sleeping serpents. How is the beast coming along? Still trying to teach it to write Shakespearean sonnets about quantum physics? He remembered a joke I'd made 3 weeks ago. He always did. It was part of his charm. Something like that, I said, turning. My screen slightly away out of instinct. It was a proprietary instinct, the dragon hoarding its gold. I finally cracked the contextual sentiment analysis. It can distinguish between sarcasm and genuine praise with 98% accuracy now. His eyes widened in a performance. Of pure astonishment, 98%, Elara, that's revolutionary. The big boys at Google are barely scratching 80. It's the parallel processing architecture, I explained, a flush of pride warming my cheeks. I couldn't help it. When you've worked this hard on something, you want someone to see its beauty. Instead of analyzing syntax linearly, it maps emotional qualifiers in a multidimensional array. It's not just reading the words, it's feeling the shape of the conversation. I saw a flicker in his eyes. Not understanding, appraisal. Like a butcher eyeing a prize hog. But at the time, I mistook it for awe. I thought he was my friend. My only real friend in this cutthroat place. The other coders were rivals, and the marketing people spoke a language I couldn't comprehend. Julian was different. He was a project manager, technically savvy enough to follow along, but not enough to be a threat. He made me feel seen. You're a certified genius, you know that? He said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Alistair would have a field day with this. That director of a innovation spot they're creating. It has your name written all over it. My heart gave a hopeful leap. The directorship. It was the talk of the office. A new C-suite adjacent role with a team. A real budget and a bonus that could pay off my parents' mortgage. My manager, a perpetually stressed man named David, had hinted that my work on Chimera was my audition for it. I hope so, I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. It's all I've been working towards. Well, don't burn yourself out before you get there, he said, patting my shoulder. The touch lingered a second too long. If you ever need a sounding board, you know where to find me. Sometimes just explaining the problem out loud is half the battle, right? Right, I agreed. Thanks, Julian, really. He gave me one last $1,000,000 smile and glided away, leaving the scent of sandalwood and ambition in his wake. I turned back to my screen, feeling validated, feeling seen. I typed in my password and got back to work, my guard completely, foolishly down. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense focus. Julian's sounding board sessions became a regular occurrence. He'd pull a chair up to my desk, listen with rapt attention as I mapped out complex data structures on the whiteboard, and nod sagely. Incredible, he'd breathe. So the tokenization matrix is self-correcting based on the semantic drift? Elara, that's brilliant. He never offered a single technical suggestion. He wasn't a builder, he was a spectator. His only contribution was praise, which he dispensed like a currency he could print at Will. One Tuesday afternoon. I hit a wall. A nasty, impenetrable, soul-crushing wall. The model was hallucinating, generating plausible but entirely fictional information, and I couldn't find the leak in the logic. For 10 hours, I traced every connection, every algorithm, every line of code, and found nothing. I was close to tears, my brain feeling like a wrung-out sponge. Julian found me staring blankly at the screen, my head in my hands. Whoa, he said softly. Looks like the beast is fighting back. I can't find it, I groaned, not. Even looking up, it's a ghost in the machine. A fundamental flaw, and I'm too deep in the weeds to see it. Explain it to me, he said, pulling up a chair. From the beginning. Like I'm an idiot. You don't have to pretend. I thought, but I was too desperate to be sarcastic. So I started talking. I explained the core architecture, the data ingestion pathways, the way the neural networks were layered. And as I spoke the words, forming them in the air for someone else, the solution suddenly illuminated in my mind like a flash of lightning. It wasn't a leak in one system. It was a resonance issue between two of them. An unforeseen harmonic frequency in the data streams. Oh my God, I whispered, my fingers flying across the keyboard. That's it. What is it? Julian asked, leaning in. The data validation protocol and the predictive text generator. They're running on slightly asynchronous clock cycles. It's creating phantom data points, I explained. My voice electric with adrenaline. I need to isolate them, put a firewall between their processes. Within an hour, I had rewritten the core module. I ran the diagnostic. The hallucinations stopped. The model was stable, perfect. I leaned back in my chair, limp with relief and triumph. We did it, Julian said, smiling warmly. I blinked. We? He had done nothing but sit there and drink a ridiculously expensive bottled water. But I was. Too high on the victory to argue? Thanks for listening, Julian. You were a huge help. Anytime, he said, his eyes gleaming. That's what partners are for. That should have been the warning, the klaxon, the giant flashing red light. But I was tired and I was grateful and I let it slide. I let him take a piece of my victory. It was a small piece, I thought, a finder's fee for my own breakthrough. I didn't realize he was just getting started. The announcement for the Q3 all-hands strategy meeting landed in our inboxes a week later. The subject line was simple: the future of Synapse. My manager, David, called me into his office. "Big day, Elara," he said, barely looking. Up from his monitor. David was a man perpetually treading water. Alistair is announcing the new directorate. "I've put your name forward. Chimera is the key. Make sure your presentation deck is polished." "I've been working on it," I said, my heart thumping. "It's ready. Good. This is a big one. For you and for the company," he said, finally meeting my eyes. He gave me a thin, wary smile. "Don't screw it up." For the next week, I lived and breathed the presentation. I crafted every slide, every talking point, every potential Q&A answer. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror until I could recite the technical specifications in my sleep. Julian, ever the supportive friend, offered to review it. To check for typos and flow, he'd said innocently, "A second pair of eyes is always good." Like a fool, I'd emailed him the entire deck. My work, my words, my future, it's perfect. He had emailed back an hour later. "You're going to kill it. I'm so proud of you." The day of the meeting, the air in the main conference room was thick with anticipation. It was our biggest space, a sterile amphitheater with tiered seating facing a massive screen. I found a seat in the second row, my hands clammy, my stomach doing nervous backflips. I saw Julian near the front, chatting easily with a few vice presidents. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up and a wink. I smiled back, a knot of anxiety and excitement tightening in my chest. Alistair Finch, our CEO, walked onto the stage. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and the predatory stillness of a shark. He commanded silence without having to ask for it. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice resonating through the speakers. "We are at a crossroads. In an industry defined by relentless change, we must not merely adapt. We must lead. We must innovate not just incrementally, but exponentially." He clicked a button, and the screen behind him lit up with the words, "Project Prometheus." My brow furrowed. Prometheus? Was there another secret project I didn't know about? "For the past year," Alistair continued, "one of our own has been working tirelessly on a project so revolutionary, it will redefine the very fabric of our industry. A next-generation artificial intelligence that doesn't just process data, but understands it." My confusion turned to ice water in my veins. He was talking about Chimera, but he was using the wrong name. This project required a unique blend of technical genius, strategic vision, and relentless drive, Alistair said, his gaze sweeping the room. "And the man who spearheaded it is the obvious, the only choice. To lead us into this new era. Please join me in congratulating our new director of AI Innovation and welcoming him to the stage to present his groundbreaking work. Mr. Julian Thorne." The room erupted in applause. My world went silent. The clapping, the murmuring, Alistair's voice, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All I could see was Julian, rising from his seat, buttoning his suit jacket, and striding onto the stage with a humble, grateful smile plastered on his face. He shook Alistair's hand. He turned to the audience dot and he began my presentation dot, my slides, my graphics, my data, my words. They flowed from his mouth with a smooth, confident cadence. He spoke of the contextual sentiment analysis and the multi-dimensional emotional array as if he'd conceived them himself. He even told the story of the breakthrough. The moment we fixed the hallucination issue, it was a tough nut to crack, he said, a charming, self-deprecating laugh in his voice. But I found that by isolating the validation and predictive protocols, we could eliminate the signal noise. A simple solution, really, but elegant. There it was again, that poisonous, parasitic little word. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from doubling over. I chanced to look at my manager, David. He was clapping along with everyone else, a proud look on his face. He knew. He had to have known. He'd seen my work. He'd helped Julian steal it. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound. It felt physical, a cold knife twisting in my gut. I watched as Julian, my shadow, stood in my spotlight, accepting praise for my creation. He was a parasite who had finally consumed his host. He took a question from the CFO about monetization strategy, answering it with a pre-canned response I had written on slide 27. He was flawless. He was a fraud. Alistair stepped back up to conclude. As a result of this incredible achievement, the board has approved a one-time discretionary bonus of £200,000 for Julian to reward his innovation and leadership. A gasp went through the room, followed by another louder round of applause. £200,000. The money I was going to use to buy my parents a small house, to get them out of their cramped, damp flat. The money I had earned. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt my composure begin to crack. The meeting ended. People were standing, crowding around Julian, shaking his hand, slapping his back. He was radiant, a conquering hero. Through the crowd, his eyes met mine. For a split second, I saw it. Not sympathy. Not apology, triumph, a cold, hard glint of victory before he masked it with a look of practiced pity. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to say, "That's just the way the game is played." I didn't wait. I stood up on numb legs and walked out of the conference room, pushing through the celebrating throng like a sleepwalker. I didn't go back to my desk. I went to the lift, rode it down 28 floors in utter silence, and walked out into the cold London air. The city was a blur of noise and motion. I walked for hours with no destination in mind, the same scene playing over and over in my head. Julian's smile. Alistair's announcement. David's applause. My work, my future, stolen. When I finally returned to the office, it was long after dark. The space was empty, haunted by the blue glow of dormant monitors. The party was over. They had all gone out for celebratory drinks, no doubt toasting the new director. I walked to my desk. My sanctuary, it felt violated, tainted. I sank into my chair, the silence of the massive office pressing in on me. The shock had worn off. The hurt was still there, but it was being rapidly consumed by something else. Something hot and dark and terrifyingly clear. Rage. It was a pure, cold fury that settled deep in my bones. He thought he could just take it. He thought I was just a quiet, nerdy girl he could roll over. He and David and Alistair, they all thought I would just take it. I would complain to HR, get a paltry settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, and disappear. They thought I would break. They were wrong. My eyes fell upon my monitor. On the screen was the source code for Chimera, my Chimera. Julian had a copy. The company had a copy. But I had the original. The master key. And as I stared at the elegant, intricate lines of logic, a new thought began to form. A dark, beautiful, and vengeful thought. He stole my code, yes. But he didn't write it. He didn't understand its depths. He didn't know its secrets, and he certainly didn't know about the back door I had built into it. The small, discreet, and utterly devastating payload I had coded into its core months ago as a failsafe. A logic bomb. A little surprise for a rainy day. A smile touched my lips for the first time in hours. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of an architect looking at a blueprint for demolition. Julian Thorne had built his new career on a foundation of my making, and I was about to burn it to the ground. Rage is a fire. It can burn you out, leave you as nothing but ash and bitter memory, or you can stoke it. You can feed it, bank it, and forge it into a weapon. As I sat there in the humming silence of the 28th floor, bathed in the glow of my life's work, I chose to become a blacksmith of my own fury. I would not be a victim. I would be a vengeance. The backdoor I had built into Camaro wasn't a product of paranoia, not really. It was an intellectual exercise, a testament to my belief that any perfect system should have a perfect, elegant method of self-destruction. A creator should always know how to uncreate. I'd named the subroutine Janus after the two-faced god of beginnings and endings. It was my secret signature, hidden deep in the foundational architecture, cloaked in layers of polymorphic code that made it invisible to any standard diagnostic. It was designed to be beautiful in its lethality. Janus didn't just crash a system that was clumsy, brutish. No, Janus was insidious. It was a logic bomb that, once activated, would lie dormant, listening. It would learn the system's patterns, its data streams, its core functions. Then, slowly, subtly, it would begin to poison the well. It would introduce rounding errors so small they were statistically irrelevant at first. It would swap synonyms and generate a text efficient for adequate, innovative for novel, minor corruptions. Digital whispers. Over time, these whispers would grow into shouts, escalating the decay exponentially until the final pre-programmed trigger was hit. At that point, it would unleash what I called a cascade of sublime nonsense. It wouldn't just break the machine. It would make the machine mock its own purpose. And Julian Thorne, the new director of AI innovation, was about to plug this ticking time bomb into the very heart of synapse dynamics. My plan began to crystallize, no longer a formless cloud of anger, but a sharp, crystalline structure. I would not quit. I would not complain to HR. I would stay. I would play the part of the good soldier, the defeated but loyal employee. I would help him. I would watch him pour the company's resources and reputation into my stolen code, and I would wait for the most public, most humiliating moment possible to detonate it all. He wanted to be a star. I would make sure his career went supernova. The next morning, I walked into the office with a mask of quiet resignation carefully fixed on my face. I'd practiced it in the mirror, eyes slightly downcast, a slump. In my shoulders, a face devoid of the fire I felt in my gut. I looked like a victim. It was the perfect camouflage. I hadn't been at my desk for 5 minutes before I got the summons. Meeting request, David Chun. David's office was a glass box that looked out over the entire floor. He motioned for me to sit, refusing to meet my eyes. He fiddled with a pen, clicking it over and over. Elara, he began, his voice thin. Look, about yesterday. I know this is difficult. I said nothing. I just watched him squirm. Julian is a real go-getter, he continued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He has a knack for seeing the bigger picture, for the strategic angle. Sometimes in a business like ours, that's just as important as the technical side. He was justifying it. Justifying the theft. My hands curled into fists under the table. He presented my work, David. He presented a vision, David corrected, a little too quickly. A vision built on a strong technical foundation, which you provided, and the company wants to recognize your contribution. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a revised employment offer. My title was changed from software engineer to senior AI developer. There was a 5% salary increase. It was an insult wrapped in corporate letterhead. Hush money. We want you to take a lead role on Julian's new team. he said, his voice gaining a false, upbeat tempo. He specifically asked for you. He values your skills immensely. This is a huge opportunity, Elara, to be at the center of the most important project in this company's history. To be the chief engineer on my own public execution. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, watching the sweat bead on David's upper lip. I picked up the paper, pretending to read it. Then I looked at him, my expression one of weary defeat. Okay, I whispered. Relief washed over his face. He'd been expecting a fight, tears, a resignation. He wasn't prepared for compliance. Good, he said, standing up, the meeting clearly over. That's great. I knew you'd see the bigger picture. I walked out of his office and straight into Julian. He was waiting for me, leaning against the wall, a concerned look expertly painted on his handsome face. Hey, he said softly, as if approaching a spooked animal. Can we talk? He led me to a small, empty breakout room. He closed the door. Listen, Elara, he started, his voice a low, sincere murmur. I know how that must have looked yesterday, and I'm so sorry if it came across the wrong way. I stared at the wall behind his head, focusing on a speck of dust. If I looked him in the eye, he would see the murder there. It all just happened so fast, he lied, running a hand through his perfect hair. I was showing Alistair the potential applications of the project, the things we'd talked about, and he just ran with it. He saw me as the leader, the face for it. I was as surprised as you were. It was an incredible performance. He was playing the part of the accidental hero, the reluctant king. He was positioning me as the ungrateful subordinate. I need you, Elara, he said, his voice dropping further. Prometheus is your baby as much as it is mine. I'm just the packaging. You're the genius. I want you to be my senior lead. We can do this together. Partners. There was that word again, partners. The lie was so potent, so vile, it almost made me gag. I had to clench my jaw to keep from screaming. This was my moment. This was the test. Could I swallow my pride? Could I swallow my rage? I took a slow breath and finally met his gaze. I let him see the hurt in my eyes, but not the hate. I let him see the broken programmer, not the avenging angel. I don't have a choice, do I? I said, my voice barely a whisper. He placed a hand on my arm. His touch felt like a spider. This is the best choice for everyone, he said soothingly. You'll see. We're going to change the world with this thing. You have no idea, I thought. Okay, Julian, I said, pulling my arm away. I'll do it. He beamed, his face alight with victory. Excellent. Welcome to the team. My double life began. By day, I was Elara Vance, senior AI developer on Project Prometheus. I was quiet, efficient, and cooperative. I sat in strategy meetings as Julian, my new boss, used my own ideas and presented them as his strategic directives. He'd butcher the technical explanations, and I would have to step in and gently correct him, saving him from looking like a fool in front of the engineers he'd hired. Elara is my rock, he'd say to the others, patting me on the back. The brains of the operation. He thought it was a compliment. He thought it was placating me. What he didn't realize was that every time he did it, he was just twisting the knife I was planning to bury in his back. I was indispensable. I helped them integrate Chimera Prometheus into the company's new flagship product. It was an ambitious platform called Synapse Oracle, a subscription-based service that promised to give corporate clients unparalleled market insights and predictive analytics. It was Julian's baby, the vessel for his glorious career. And I made sure it was a beautiful, perfect, seaworthy vessel. From the outside. By night, I became a ghost. I'd work late, long after everyone else had gone home, under the guise of being a dedicated employee. But my real work began after midnight. I bought a burner laptop for cash from a dingy shop in Camden, along with a fistful of pay-as-you-go. Anonymous SIM cards. I never connected it to the office Wi-Fi. I'd tether it to a burner phone, routing my signal through a chain of encrypted VPNs that bounced from Zurich to Stockholm to Seoul before it ever touched the internet. It was untraceable. On this sterile, isolated machine, I worked on Janus. I was no longer just a programmer. I was an artist of destruction. The payload needed to be more than just a crash. It needed to be ironic. It needed to be poetic. I burrowed into Synapse Dynamics' internal marketing servers, an easy task since I knew their security architecture. I downloaded their brand guidelines, their corporate mission statements, their list of cheesy inspirational mantras. Words like synergy, innovation, disruption, paradigm shift, all the meaningless jargon they use to justify their existence. I began to teach Janus to hate these words. I programmed it so that when the final trigger was pulled, it would cross-reference the client's query with this dictionary of corporate platitudes. Then, instead of providing market analysis, it would begin generating responses that twisted that corporate speak into pure, unadulterated chaos. A request for financial projections would be met with a long, rambling paragraph about how synergy is like a flock of birds flying into a jet engine. A query about market trends would generate a philosophical treatise on how disruption is the art of setting your own house on fire to collect the insurance money. It would be absurd. It would be embarrassing. And it would be broadcast live to the entire world. The work was exhilarating. It was a dark, thrilling secret in a life that had become a monotonous lie. Some nights I'd work until dawn, my mind buzzing with malicious code, and then I'd go home, shower, change, and be back at my desk by 9 a.m. to sit in a meeting, and nod along as Julian took credit for my day's work. The strain was immense. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. "You're working too hard, Elara," Julian said to me one afternoon, with that infuriatingly fake concern in his voice. "Don't burn out. I need you." "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat. "Just want to make sure the Oracle launch is perfect." "That's my girl," he said with a condescending smile. He had no idea I was a saboteur in his engine room, replacing his ship's bolts with sticks of dynamite. The announcement came in late spring. Synapse Dynamics was hosting the Synapse Summit, a one-day conference and launch event for Synapse Oracle. It was going to be huge. They'd rented out a massive, modern auditorium in Canary Wharf. They were flying in investors from New York and Tokyo. Every major tech journalist was on the press list. And the entire event, including the keynote address and live demo, would be live-streamed at the keynote, of course, was Julian. He was ecstatic, practically vibrating with self-importance. He walked around the office like a Roman emperor, talking about his keynote, his vision, his legacy. My stomach churned every time I saw him, but I kept my face a perfect mask of placid calm. The stage was set. It was more public, more high stakes than I could have ever dreamed. The bigger the stage, the harder the fall. Now, all I needed was the trigger. A remote command was too risky. It could be traced. I needed something better, something that gave me plausible deniability. The idea came to me one night as I was staring at the half-finished code for Janus, a dead man switch, but in reverse. An all's well signal. The final version of the trigger was my masterpiece of malevolent code. Janus would be armed and activated 24 hours before the summit. From that moment on, it would be waiting. During the specific 15-minute window of the live demo, it would require a constant all-clear signal. I would have a burner phone, a simple, untraceable device. On that phone, I would have a custom-built app, a simple button. I would have to press that button every 60 seconds. Each press would send a uniquely encrypted, time-stamped packet, a digital heartbeat to a dead-drop server, which Janus would be monitoring. As long as Janus received that heartbeat, it would remain dormant, and the oracle would function perfectly. But if I miss one, if a single 60-second window passed without a signal, Janus would interpret the silence as its command to execute. The payload would be released. The system would tear itself apart from the inside out. It was perfect. I wasn't triggering the crash. I was merely failing to prevent it. In the ensuing investigation, they would find no trace of an attack. Number. Malicious command. All they would find was the absence of a signal. How could they blame me for something I didn't do? I would be in the audience, just another employee. My hands would be clean. The day before the Synapse Summit, the office was electric. Julian was rehearsing his keynote in the main boardroom, his voice booming through the walls. I sat at my desk, running a final silent diagnostic on my own systems. The Janus code was embedded, the payload was armed, and the kill switch was active. In my bag, the burner phone was fully charged. There was no turning back now. I looked across the office at Julian, strutting and preening for his adoring acolytes. He caught my eye through the glass wall of the boardroom and gave me a big, confident grin. He thought we were on the same team. He thought this was his victory. He was standing on a trap door, and my hand was on the lever. I felt nothing. Not fear, not doubt, not even anger anymore. All of that had been burned away, forged into the cold, hard certainty of what was to come. I felt only a quiet, thrilling calm. The calm of a creator about to become a destroyer. The auditorium was a cathedral of corporate hubris. A vast tiered cavern of brushed steel, gray felt, and recessed lighting. It was designed to make a product launch feel like a historic proclamation. The air itself felt expensive, smelling of new carpet and the faint citrusy scent of professionally managed ambition. On the colossal screen that dominated the stage, the Synapse Dynamics logo pulsed with a slow, hypnotic blue heartbeat. Investors in sharp suits murmured to each other in low, serious tones. Journalists sat hunched over their laptops, fingers poised, ready to translate hype into headlines. I found a seat in the upper tiers, far from the front row splash zone. From here, I was just another face in the crowd, anonymous and invisible, perfect. In the pocket of my coat, my hand was wrapped around the burner phone. The smooth, cheap plastic felt both alien and intimately familiar. It was a detonator, a key. The instrument of a carefully composed symphony of destruction. My own heart was a steady, slow drumbeat in my chest. There was no anxiety, no fear. The girl who had cried in the empty office was gone. I had burned her away and reforged myself in the fires of her humiliation. What remained was a woman made of purpose and ice. I was here not as a spectator, but as an executioner, waiting for the condemned to mount the gallows he had built for himself. The lights dimmed. A dramatic, bass-heavy track filled the room, the kind of music that tries to convince you you're about to witness the invention of the wheel. Alistair Finch strode onto the stage, bathed in a single, brilliant white spotlight. "Welcome," he boomed, his voice radiating power. "Welcome, innovators, partners, and pioneers. Today's not just another day. Today, we change the future." He spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a grand narrative of progress and disruption. He painted a picture of a world crippled by data overload and offered Synapse Dynamics as its savior. It was a masterful performance of corporate evangelism. Finally, he arrived at the main event. "But I am not the architect of this new age," he said, his voice dropping with practiced humility. That honor belongs to a man whose vision has been the driving force behind this revolution. A man I am proud to call our director of AI innovation. Please welcome Julian Thorne. The applause was thunderous. The walk-on music swelled. And there he was. Julian emerged from the wings, looking like a god in a 1,000-pound suit. He was glowing, radiant with stolen light. He waved to the crowd, flashing that brilliant, predatory smile. He shook Alistair's hand and took his. Place center stage. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you all, he began, his voice smooth as silk. For the past year, my team and I have been asking one simple question. What if a machine could not just think, but understand? I felt a bitter laugh bubble in my throat, but I choked it down. His team, his question. The lie was so effortless. For him now, he launched into his keynote, and I recognized every slide, every talking point, every carefully crafted metaphor. They were mine. He was a parrot reciting words he didn't comprehend. He spoke of Prometheus as if he had breathed life into it, as if its digital soul was an extension of his own. The audience was captivated. They leaned forward, soaking it all in. They believed him. Then came the moment, but enough talk, Julian said, a dramatic flair in his gesture. Seeing is believing. Let's show you what Prometheus, the engine behind our revolutionary new platform, Synapse Oracle, can do. Live. A sleek, glowing white pod rose from the stage floor, a keyboard and monitor pristine under the lights. The main screen behind him flickered to life, showing the Oracle's user interface. It was clean, minimalist, and deeply intuitive. I had designed it that way. As Julian walked towards the terminal, I took the burner phone from my pocket, shielding it from view. My thumb hovered over the simple, custom-built app. A single gray button on a black screen. I pressed it once. A faint vibration confirmed the signal was sent. In some forgotten server rack miles away, a digital heartbeat reached Janus, telling it to stay quiet. The 60-second countdown had begun in my head. 60, 59, 58. Let's start with something simple, Julian announced. Let's ask the Oracle to analyze the current European equities market and predict the top-performing sector for the next quarter. He typed in the query. The system processed it instantly. On the screen, a beautifully rendered graph appeared, along with a concise, insightful paragraph of analysis. It was perfect. It highlighted the tech sector, citing specific regulatory changes and market trends. It was flawless because it was my work. The crowd murmured in appreciation. Julian beamed. As you can see, the Oracle doesn't just give you data, it gives you answers. 32. 31, 30. The seconds ticked by in my mind. Julian basked in the applause, taking a moment to let the achievement sink in. I kept my eyes on him, my thumb poised. 10, 9, 8. My heart rate didn't even flicker. 3, 2, 1. Click. I pressed the button again. Another silent signal. Another 60 seconds of life for his stolen dream. But that's just the beginning, he continued, emboldened. The real power of this platform is in its deep strategic analysis. Let's give it a real challenge. He turned to the front row. Mr. Ito, so good of you to join us from Tokyo. A distinguished-looking man, the CEO of a massive electronics conglomerate, gave a slight nod. Your company is considering a major expansion into the South American market. It's a complex decision with thousands of variables. Let's ask the Oracle for a risk assessment and market entry strategy. He typed in the complex query. The audience held its collective breath. This was the big one. The kind of problem that entire teams of analysts would spend months on. 50, 49, 48. The countdown was relentless. The Oracle's progress bar filled. The screen flickered and then produced a multi-page, comprehensive report in seconds. It detailed logistical challenges, political stability risks, consumer demographic data, and a phased 3-year rollout plan. It was brilliant. It was genius. It was mine. Mr. Ito looked visibly impressed. Alistair was beaming like a proud father. Julian's ego seemed to inflate, filling the entire stage. He was invincible. 15, 14, 13. He was gloating now, explaining the nuances of the report he was reading for the first time. He was on top of the world. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, click. I pressed the button. I was giving him the rope, letting him climb higher and higher. The fall would be that much more spectacular. One last thing, Julian said, his voice ringing with triumph. The true holy grail, predictive accuracy. I'm going to ask the Oracle to draft a mock press release for Mr. Ito's company, dated 6 months from now, announcing the successful results of their top-secret product launch. Based on its internal R&D data, this was it, the grand finale. The ultimate display of the AI's supposed power. He was promising to predict the future, he typed with a flourish. He looked out at the audience, a smug, conquering look on his face. This was his moment of apotheosis. The moment his name would be etched into the annals of tech history. In my mind, the clock was ticking. 51, 50, 49. I watched his face, arrogant and self-satisfied. I thought of the long nights, the sacrificed weekends, the passion I had poured into my creation. I thought of him calling me his partner while he was gutting my future. I thought of the dismissive, triumphant look he gave me in the conference room. 35, 34, 33. My thumb was poised over the screen. It was time. I could press the button one more time. I could let him have his victory. We could all go home, and I could live with the quiet, festering knowledge of my defeat. 22, 21, 20, or I could do nothing. I watched the countdown in my head reach its final seconds. 10, 9, 8, my thumb didn't move. 7, 6, 5. It was as steady as stone. 4, 3, 2, 1. 0. The 60-second window closed. The heartbeat signal did not arrive. Deep within the servers of Synapse Dynamics, Janus opened its eyes. On the stage, Julian hit enter, and here is the future, he declared. For a second, the system seemed to be working. Text began to appear on the screen, but something was wrong. The first sentence read, "The successful launch of the Ethelred product line demonstrates our commitment to shareholder value and strategic paradigm disruption." A ripple of confusion went through the audience. Paradigm disruption? It was a clumsy, jarring use of corporate jargon. Julian's smile tightened. He'd seen it. He tried to ignore it, hoping no one else noticed. "A minor syntax artifact," he said quickly, his voice a little too loud. "The system is processing a massive data set." He tried a different command, a simple one, asking for a summary of the report. The screen flickered. The new text appeared. Summary. "The synergy of the project is questionable, like a beautiful car with wheels made of cheese. Profitable, perhaps, if you are in the business of selling cheese wheels." A few titters of laughter broke the silence. They still thought it was a simple bug, a funny glitch. Julian's face had gone pale. His confident posture had vanished. He looked small on the big stage. Let's reboot the query," he stammered, his fingers fumbling on the keyboard. He was sweating now, beads of moisture visible on his forehead under the hot stage lights. He frantically retyped the command for the press release. This time, the cascade began. The screen went wild. The AI, my beautiful, elegant creation, now possessed by the vengeful spirit of Janus, began to spew the most glorious, reputation-shattering chaos imaginable. It started writing a press release that accused Mr. Ito's company of planning to use enslaved squirrels to power their new devices. It generated a fake, damning internal memo from Alastair Finch to the board, detailing a plan to replace the entire staff with moderately intelligent garden gnomes for tax purposes. It took the Synapse Dynamics mission statement and rewrote. It is a nihilistic poem about the futility of human endeavor in a meaningless universe. The laughter in the auditorium had died, replaced by shocked gasps. Journalists were typing furiously, their faces lit by the glow of their screens. Phones were up everywhere, recording the disaster. Mr. Ito was on his feet, his face a mask of cold fury. Julian was frozen, staring at the screen in horror. He was frantically hitting the escape key, but the system was no longer listening to him. It was possessed. My creation had become my monster, and it was devouring its false father live on stage. As a final, spectacular act of self-immolation, Janus pulled the corporate logos of every major client in the room onto the screen. One by one, it began to grotesquely distort them, twisting them into obscene shapes and caricatures. And then the screen went black. For one terrifying second of silence, then 3 words appeared, written in a simple, stark white font. 50 feet high, Prometheus is a lie, the system died. The screens went black. The glowing pot on the stage powered down with a final, pathetic sigh. The stage lights flickered and went out, leaving only the dim house lights on. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight that held everyone in place. Then, chaos, shouting, people standing up, the flash of cameras going off like 1,000 strobing lightning bugs. Alastair and a team of panicked executives were running onto the stage towards Julian, who stood there, a hollowed-out statue of failure, stammering nonsense into a dead microphone. I watched the beautiful, perfect implosion for another 10 seconds, savoring it. I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. It felt like breathing for the first time in months. Quietly, I stood up. I slipped the burner phone, its purpose served, deep into the pocket of my coat. No one noticed me. All eyes were on the train wreck on stage. I turned and walked up the aisle, moving against the tide of panicked staff running towards the disaster. I didn't run. I walked with a calm, steady pace out of the auditorium, through the chaotic lobby, and out the main doors into the cool afternoon air. The sounds of the sirens were just beginning in the distance. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. I didn't go to the office the next day. There was no need. The office, in a sense, came to me, screaming from the screen of my laptop. The fallout wasn't just a corporate embarrassment. It was a global news event. I sat on my sofa in the quiet morning light of my flat, a mug of tea warming my hands, and watched the world burn down the empire I had built and destroyed. Every major news outlet had the story. Synapse Summit ends in catastrophic AI meltdown. The oracle is broken. Tech giant stock plummets 40% in pre-market trading. A glimpse of the apocalypse. Rogue AI delivers bizarre, nihilistic rant at own launch event. There were video clips everywhere. A close-up of Julian's face, pale and sweating, his eyes wide with a horror he couldn't comprehend. A shot of Mr. Ito, the Japanese CEO, storming out of the auditorium, his face a perfect mask of thunderous rage. And of course, the grand finale, the 3 stark words that had sealed Synapse's fate. Prometheus is a lie. The phrase was already a meme. It was being printed on t-shirts. It was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. It was the epitaph for a company that had died of arrogance. My phone was a constant buzz of notifications. A group chat with a few former colleagues coders I'd been friendly with, if not close to, was a real-time feed from the heart of the disaster zone, 9:15. Chloe, oh my god, all hands meeting in 5. Alastair looks like he's aged 20 years, 9:17. Sam, they've locked us out of the Prometheus servers. All of them. There's a team of external security consultants in the main boardroom. Looks like the Spanish Inquisition, 921, Chloe. Julian just walked past. He looks like a ghost. Avoided eye contact with everyone. I read their messages with a kind of detached, clinical interest. It was like reading the damage report from a missile strike I had ordered from half a world away. There was no elation, no fist-pumping triumph, just a cold, clean, quiet satisfaction. The feeling of a complex equation finally being solved. In my mind, I saw the scene I couldn't see in person. The main boardroom, once the site of my betrayal, now the stage for Julian's reckoning. Alistair Finch would be there, his face carved from granite, all his feigned corporate bonhomie stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. Beside him, a team of stone-faced cyber forensics experts, the kind of people who speak in acronyms and view all of humanity as a potential security flaw. And in the center of it all, Julian, the golden boy, now tarnished and flaking away. Explain it, Julian. Alistair's voice would be a low growl. You told us you built it. You told us you knew it inside and out. So explain how it called. My board of directors, moderately intelligent garden gnomes, in front of 300 journalists. I don't know, Julian would stammer, his voice thin and reedy. All his charisma, all his slick charm would be gone, useless. In the face of this technical cataclysm, it must have been an attack. A hacker, a virus. One of the consultants, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper haircut, would slide a tablet across the table. We've been doing a core dump for the last 12 hours, Mr. Thorne. There was no external breach. No unauthorized access. No signature of any known malware. The anomalous code, the subroutine we're calling Janus, appears to be a deeply embedded, brilliantly obfuscated part of the primary architecture. It's almost organic. Whoever wrote the source code for Prometheus wrote Janus too. We were wondering if you could walk us through its functionality. The trap was sprung. He had claimed my work as his own, and now the bill for that lie had come due. He couldn't explain the code because he'd never understood it. He couldn't walk them through its architecture because he'd only ever seen the polished user interface. He was a king who had stolen a crown, only to be asked to explain the intricate art of metallurgy that went into its forging. He would flounder. He would sweat. He would try to drown them in the same buzzwords he had used to dazzle them before. But the words would now be hollow, meaningless, synergy, paradigm, innovation. They would sound like the desperate babbling of a con man whose... Mark had finally looked behind the curtain, and then inevitably he would play his last desperate card. It was Vance, he'd spit out, his eyes wild with panic. Elara Vance, she was the lead coder before I took over. She was bitter about the promotion. She must have planted a time bomb in the code. She's the only one who knew it that... Well, the consultant would raise an eyebrow, but Mr. Thorne, we were under the impression that you knew it that well. You took a 200,000-pound bonus based on that assumption. Are you now telling us that a junior developer, who you were managing, knew the architecture of your flagship project better than you did? Checkmate. Every accusation he threw at me would just be an admission of his own fraud. By trying to frame me, he was confessing he was an imposter. He had walked into a cage of his own making, and I had simply, silently closed the door behind. The forensic team would never find me. I knew that with absolute certainty. Janus was designed to look like an internal system failure, a bizarre cascade of emergent, undesirable behavior. It had no external trigger they could trace. The dead drop server I'd used for the heartbeat signal was on a recycled IP address. In a cafe in Jakarta, wiped clean the moment the Synapse Summit feed had cut out. The burner phone was at the bottom of a canal in Camden, and the laptop was already a pile of slag in an industrial incinerator. There was no trail, No breadcrumbs, no murder weapon. All they had was a ghost in the machine and a fraud in the boardroom. The final report, I imagined, would be a masterpiece of corporate speak, concluding that the AI had suffered a spontaneous recursive logic failure due to unforeseen complexities in its generative architecture. They would call it a 1 in a billion glitch, a digital black swan. They would never admit they'd been conned by a charismatic fool and betrayed by the quiet girl in the corner. The truth was too embarrassing, too damaging. They would choose the explanation that saved what little face they had left. But Julian was a liability they could not afford. 1432. Sam. Holy shit. They just walked Julian out. 1433. Chloe. Walked him out. 1433 Sam, with 2 security guards. He was carrying one of those cardboard boxes with his stuff in it. He looked completely broken. 1435. Chloe. David Chen is gone too. His office is empty. They're cleaning house. I closed the chat window. A faint, cool smile touched my lips. The debt was paid. The next Monday, while the smoking crater of Synapse Dynamics was still being picked over by lawyers and auditors, I walked into the lobby of Quantum Leap Technologies. The contrast was immediate. The Synapse office had been a playground of bright colors, open-plan desks, and motivational posters. It was designed to look fun. The QLT office was quiet, serious, and functional. It was a place for adults to work. There were private offices, hushed hallways, and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and hot coffee. My new boss was a woman named Dr. Elara Thorne, no relation to Julian, thankfully. She was in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found instantly reassuring. She didn't offer me a fluffy corporate welcome. She got straight to the point. Vance, she said, shaking my hand firmly. Good to have you. I assume you've been following the news about your former employers. It's been hard to miss, I said dryly. A complete circus, she agreed, leading me down a hallway to a spacious corner office with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. My name was already on the door, Dr. Elara Vance, head of AI research. The title felt like a physical weight, a good one. I read the original white paper you published on the Chimera architecture before they repackaged it as that Prometheus nonsense. It was the most elegant approach to generative linguistics I've seen in a decade. It was a work of genius. They were fools to waste it, and even bigger fools to not see who their real talent was. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with anger or revenge. It was a feeling I had almost forgotten. Recognition, genuine professional respect. She wasn't praising my ability to play the corporate game. She was praising my work. They gave it to a marketing guy with good hair, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Predictable. That's what happens when a company values presentation over substance. Here, we value substance. Your lab is downstairs. Your team starts next week. Your budget is on your desk. We expect great things from you. And that was it. No condescending pats on the arm. No stolen glory. Just a clear mandate, a budget, and a belief in my ability. I stood in my new office, the chaotic downfall of Synapse feeling a million miles away. This was the future I had been working for, the one Julian had tried to steal. I had just taken a very violent, very scenic detour to get here. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the company's current research, my mind buzzing with new ideas, new possibilities. For the first time in months, I felt the pure, unadulterated joy of creation returning, untainted by the need for deception or revenge. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, quiet space. Late in the afternoon, I got one last text from Chloe. 1648. Chloe, the final nail in the coffin. A journalist found Julian's uni dissertation. He plagiarized half of it. It's all over the net now. His whole career has been a lie. He's finished. Not just at Synapse, everywhere. I read the message, took a slow sip of my coffee, and deleted the entire chat history. Julian Thorne no longer existed in my world. He was just another piece of digital debris floating in the vast, unforgiving ocean of the internet. The fallout had been contained. The target was neutralized. And I was free. I turned back to the blank whiteboard in my new office, picked up a pen, and began to draw the blueprints for something new, something better, something that was entirely and securely my own. 6 months later, London was draped in the cool gray light of late autumn. The leaves in the park outside my office window were a blaze of amber and gold, a slow, beautiful decay that felt a world away from the catastrophic implosion I had engineered. The name Synapse Dynamics was now little more than a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms and venture capital offices of the city. They had been acquired, or rather, their assets had been picked apart for scrap by a larger, stodgier competitor. The great oracle was silent forever. The god Prometheus had been exposed as a hollow idol, and its temple had been razed to the ground. My new world at Quantum Leap Technologies was one of quiet, relentless competence. My days were no longer a tense performance of a double life, but a genuine immersion in the work I loved. My team was a curated collection of the brightest minds I could find: a grizzled, cynical data architect from Germany, a brilliant but painfully shy machine learning prodigy from South Korea, and a pragmatic project manager who saw schedules as sacred texts. They were professionals. They respected me not because I had a title, but because I could deconstruct a flawed algorithm in my head and sketch out a more elegant solution on a whiteboard in under 5 minutes. They respected my work. We were building something new. Something I called Argent, where Chimera had been a wild, almost untamed exploration of language. Argent was a model built on the core principle of verifiable truth. It was designed to combat disinformation, to trace sources, to distinguish between fact and sophisticated fiction. It was, in its own way, the antidote to the poison of a world that had allowed a man like Julian Thorne to flourish. This morning, I was leading a code review session. My team was gathered around a large monitor in our lab, a comfortable, well-lit space that prioritized function over flashy design. We were analyzing a module written by Minjun, our young prodigy. The efficiency. "Here's excellent, Minjun," I said, pointing to a section of the code. "But I'm seeing a potential for recursive drift in the validation layer. See how the query string is tokenized here? If we get a query with nested double negatives, it could create a feedback loop and start degrading the source attribution." Minchun's eyes widened as he saw it. "Ah, you're right, Dr. Vance. The logic is too literal. It needs a semantic override." "Exactly," I smiled. "Let's brainstorm a solution." And just like that, we were off. A collaborative, respectful, and deeply intellectual discussion. No egos, no politics. No one trying to steal credit or feign understanding. We were simply a team of builders trying to make the best thing we could make. This was all I had ever wanted. A year ago, I would have had to solve that problem alone, then watch someone else take credit for it. Now, it was a shared victory. This, I realized, was what true synergy felt like. Not the empty buzzword Julian had loved, but the real, multiplicative power of trusted minds working in concert. Later that day, a ghost flickered on my screen. An email forwarded from my personal account. It was a mass message sent out to the alumni of Synapse Dynamics, a sort of digital wake. It was a link to a "Where Are They Now" article in a minor tech blog. Morbid curiosity, a final glance back at the battlefield, made me click. The article was a predictable mix of corporate postmortems and human interest tidbits. Some engineers had landed on their feet. The marketing team had scattered to the winds. Alistair Finch had stepped down to pursue other opportunities, a polite euphemism for being forced into early retirement by his furious board. And then, at the bottom, there was a small paragraph under the heading, "What about the golden boy?" It detailed Julian's spectacular fall from grace. The plagiarism scandal had destroyed what little was left of his reputation. He was unemployable in the London tech scene. The last they'd heard, he was selling luxury watches on commission in a department store in Knightsbridge. From director of innovation to a shop boy, a man whose entire identity had been built on a lie, now spent his days selling authentic items to people who could afford them. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I stared at the paragraph for a long moment. I felt nothing. No pity, no glee. It was like reading about the fate of a character in a book I had finished long ago. His story was over. It had no more bearing on mine. The rage that had fueled me for months had been a jet engine, roaring and white hot. Now it was gone, and the silence it left behind was a profound and lasting peace. I closed the browser. Tab. The past was the past. It had no place in my new beginning. That evening, I stayed late, long after the office had emptied out. The quiet hum of the servers was a familiar comfort. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sprawling galaxy of lights that was London. The city was a vast, complex system, full of beauty and brutality, genius and fraud, all existing side by side. For months, I had been consumed by the injustice of it all, by the simple, unfair fact that a man like Julian could succeed while I was overlooked. My revenge had been an attempt to rebalance the scales, to force an audit on a corrupt system, but was it worth it? I let the question settle in my mind, examining it from all angles. The person I had become to pull it off, she still lived inside. Me, the woman who could lie with a placid face, who could nurture a grudge like a precious hothouse flower, who could meticulously plan the absolute destruction of another human being's career. She hadn't disappeared when Julian was fired. She was a part of my architecture now, a dormant subroutine, a failsafe, and I realized, standing there in the darkness, that I was not sorry. I was not ashamed. The world isn't a fairy tale. It doesn't reward the quiet, diligent, and brilliant just for being brilliant. It rewards the loud, the aggressive, the ones who are willing to take what they want. Julian understood this. He had tried to take my future. My response was not an act of petty revenge. It was an act of war. A necessary, brutal, and asymmetrical response to an existential threat. I had been faced with a choice, to be erased or to become a destroyer. I chose to survive. I chose to win. The coldness I had cultivated wasn't a flaw. It was a shield. A weapon I now knew how to wield. It would keep me safe. It would ensure that no one would ever mistake my quiet focus for weakness again. No one would ever steal from me again, because the ghost of what happened at the Synapse Summit would follow my reputation forever. They would say my first major project had self-destructed in a ball of fire, and they would never know that I was the one holding the match. Let them wonder. Let them be a little afraid of the quiet woman in the corner office. Fear, I had learned, was a much more effective form of respect than praise. I had walked through the fire of my own rage and emerged harder, stronger, and infinitely more aware of the world around me. I had lost my naivety, but I had gained a sense of unshakable self-possession. The price was worth it. The victory was absolute. I turned from the window and walked back to my terminal. My fingers found the keyboard, the familiar feel of the keys a comfort. I pulled up the core of Project Argent. The code glowed on the screen, a universe of possibility. It was clean, it was elegant, and it was secure. It was protected by layers of encryption and digital watermarks that were woven into its very DNA. It was unequivocally mine. I began to type. New lines of logic flowed from my mind, through my fingers, and onto the screen. I was creating again. The joy was back, purer and deeper than before, because it was now tempered with wisdom. I was no longer just a builder. I was a sovereign of my own small kingdom of logic, and I had learned how to defend its borders. The story wasn't girl gets revenge. The story was creator reclaims her creation. Julian was just a catalyst, a villain in the origin story of the woman I was now, a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who knew her own power, a woman who would never, ever be a footnote in someone else's biography again. My fingers flew across the keyboard, building new worlds out of light and logic. The work was everything. And as the first hints of dawn began to break over the city, I looked at what I had built, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was only the beginning.